Lena had been working at the event hall for only 3 weeks, and every shift still felt like walking into a different world. The place was huge, filled with glass walls, golden lights, and the kind of expensive perfume that floated in the air even after people walked past. Tonight was even bigger than usual. A famous billionaire was hosting a private gathering for business partners, investors, and a few celebrities. Everyone there looked polished, confident, and wealthy in a way Lena had only seen in magazines. She moved from table to table quietly, trying not to spill anything. Her job was simple: serve drinks, clear empty glasses, and stay invisible. That was exactly how she preferred it. The last thing she wanted was attention, especially in a place where she felt she didn't belong. But she needed the job, and she needed the money, so she forced a smile whenever someone looked her way. In the middle of the hall stood a shiny black grand piano. It looked like it had never been touched, sitting there more like decoration than an instrument. A few guests walked around it, admiring how perfect it looked under the lights. Lena tried not to stare at it. Even from far away, the piano reminded her of a life she had left behind. The billionaire, known for his loud voice and bigger ego, took the stage to welcome everyone. He was cheerful at first, making jokes, bragging about the success of his company, and thanking everyone for attending. The crowd laughed at everything he said, even when the jokes weren't funny. After all, no one wanted to upset the man who practically controlled half the businesses in the room. At one point, the billionaire noticed a grand piano and tapped its side with a grin. He began talking about how true talent was rare, how anyone could pretend to be skilled, but only a few were born with real gifts. The guests clapped politely. To most people, it was just another speech. But to Lena, the words hit a little deeper. She tried to focus on the glasses she was carrying instead of the piano or the man boasting beside it. As she stepped closer to one table to refill glasses, a group of guests started joking among themselves. They were already a little tipsy, laughing at things that weren't even funny. One of them pointed at Lena and said, "I heard these staff members sometimes know how to play. Maybe she can entertain us." Lena froze for a moment. She didn't know the man and had never spoken to him before. She smiled politely and shook her head. "No, sir, I'm just here to serve." But the group found the idea amusing. Another person laughed and said, "Come on, let her try. It'll be fun." Their voices carried through the hall, catching the billionaire's attention. He turned toward them with interest. "What's going on here?" he asked in his dramatic showman tone. The guests pointed at Lena, still laughing. "She says she can play the piano," one of them lied, fully enjoying the moment. Lena's face warmed with embarrassment. "No, I never said that," she whispered quickly. But her voice was too soft to matter. The billionaire's grin grew wider. "Oh, a little hidden talent among the staff?" He looked at her like she was part of the entertainment, not a human being doing her job. "Well then, why don't you show us something? We could all use some music." Lena felt every pair of eyes shift toward her. Her throat tightened. She tried again to explain. "Sir, I'm not here for that. I'm just working." But the billionaire waved his hand as if brushing aside her words. "Relax, it's just for fun. Unless you're afraid," he said, making the crowd laugh again. The laughter wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind of laughter that came from people who assumed she couldn't possibly have any real talent. The kind of laughter that expected her to fail. A few people leaned back in their chairs, ready to watch the show. Some whispered privately, shaking their heads as though imagining how embarrassing it would be for a waitress to try playing in front of them. A couple of younger guests even pulled out their phones, hoping something funny might happen. Lena felt smaller than she had felt in a long time. She wanted to disappear. She wished she could sink into the floor or run out the door. For a second she thought about arguing again, but she knew how these events worked. If she refused, the billionaire might get irritated, and that could cost her the job. She couldn't afford that. Inside her chest, her heart pounded like a drum. The piano seemed far away, yet too close at the same time. She hadn't touched one in years. She had spent so long trying to avoid music that now, standing here, she felt unprepared, almost like she was betraying herself, but she also didn't want to be mocked. She didn't want to be remembered as the girl who got scared and refused in front of them all. She took a slow breath, trying to steady her mind. The billionaire smiled at the audience and said loudly, "Let's give her a moment." A little courage never hurt anybody. The crowd clapped again, but this time it felt almost like pressure pushing her forward. She nodded silently, even though she wasn't ready. Her steps felt heavy as she began walking toward the stage. Every footstep sounded louder in her ears, louder than the chatter around her. A few guests whispered as she passed, "Poor girl. She's going to embarrass herself. Why would a waitress even claim she can play? She's probably doing this to impress someone." Lena didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on the floor. When she finally reached the stage, the billionaire stepped aside with a showy gesture, giving her the spotlight. He had a smirk on his face, the kind that suggested he expected nothing more than a few random notes and a quick laugh. Lena stood beside the grand piano for a moment. Her fingers trembled slightly as she touched the edge of it. The surface was cold and smooth. Memories rushed in, memories she had tried so hard to bury her childhood lessons. Her mother's warm encouragement. The long hours of practice, the competitions, and the day her life shifted so drastically that she walked away from everything she loved. She swallowed hard. This was not how she imagined returning to the piano. Not like this. Not in front of strangers who thought she was a joke, but there was no turning back now. The entire hall was watching. Some people leaned forward in their seats. Others waited with amused smiles. The billionaire folded his arms, waiting for the fun to begin. Lena slowly pulled out the bench and sat down. The piano felt much larger up close. The keys were bright under the lights, almost too bright. She placed her hands on her lap at first, trying to stop them from shaking. She took another deep breath, trying to steady her heart. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She didn't think about the billionaire. She didn't think about the crowd. She didn't think about the pressure. She thought about the piano itself. The feel of the keys. The way music had once made her feel safe. The way it had once helped her express things she couldn't say with words. Slowly, she lifted her hands and placed her fingers on the keys. Not to start playing yet, but just to feel them. Even with the noise of the hall around her, even with the eyes staring, even with her heart pounding, something inside her softened. This felt familiar. This felt like home, but before she could begin, someone from the crowd shouted jokingly, "Let's see what you've got!" And laughter followed again. The sound snapped her concentration for a moment. She kept her eyes low, refusing to let their laughter break her. She inhaled again. Then she lifted her chin slightly. Something about her expression changed. Just a little, but enough for a few guests to notice. The billionaire's smirk faded a tiny bit. Maybe he sensed that she wasn't as nervous as they expected. Maybe he saw something calmer in her eyes. The room didn't fall silent yet, but there was a shift, a soft one, almost unnoticeable. Conversations lowered a bit. A few guests sat straighter. Lena rested her fingers gently on the keys, ready to play for the first time in years. Without anyone in the room realizing that the moment they were mocking would soon turn into something they would never forget. Lena kept her fingers resting gently on the piano keys, but for a few long seconds she didn't press a single note. She just sat there, breathing slowly, trying to calm the storm inside her. The hall behind her was buzzing softly with whispers and small laughs, but she tried to block out every sound. The billionaire stood a few steps away with his arms crossed, watching her like she was a performing act he had ordered for entertainment. For a moment, Lena wondered why she had agreed to this at all. She hadn't played in years. She hadn't even touched a piano since the day her old life fell apart. Music used to be everything to her, the one thing that made her feel like she belonged somewhere. But life had changed so fast, so unexpectedly, that she never found her way back to it. Working shifts, paying bills, helping her family, it all took over. Now here she was, sitting in front of a grand piano in a room full of strangers who didn't believe in her, waiting to watch her mess up. She could almost feel their doubt pressing. Against her back like a heavy weight, the billionaire cleared his throat dramatically. reminding everyone that the little show was about to begin. Some people chuckled again, but the laughter didn't sting as deeply as before. Lena closed her eyes for a second, trying to connect with the version of herself who once loved this instrument more than anything. It wasn't easy. The past felt far away, almost like a different lifetime. She thought of the little girl she once was, sitting on a wooden stool at a small community music school. Back then, the piano keys had felt huge under her tiny fingers. She could still remember how her mother would wait near the door, watching her with a gentle smile that made everything feel possible. Those memories floated back slowly, warming her chest the way sunlight warms a cold room, but along with the good memories came others. The arguments, the stress, the financial struggles, the day everything went wrong. Those thoughts tightened her chest again, making her shoulders tense. She shook her head slightly. She couldn't let the past swallow her, now not when everyone was waiting. Few guests began whispering again. She's taking long. Maybe she forgot how to play. Probably just nervous. Or maybe she doesn't know anything at all. Lena opened her eyes. The lights overhead were bright, almost too bright, and the keys seemed to glow beneath her fingers. She could hear her heartbeat, fast but steady, like it was urging her to do something, anything. She pressed one key gently, a soft note filled the air. It wasn't a performance yet, just a single test note, but it echoed through the hall in a way that made a few people turn their heads. Lena wasn't even sure why she pressed it. Maybe she needed to remind herself the piano was real. Maybe she needed to hear that sound again. She lifted her hand for a moment and looked at the keys. They seemed to be asking her a question. Are you ready? But she wasn't sure. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the weight of memories she had locked away when she was younger. Everyone believed she would become something in the world of music. She had talent, passion, discipline. Her teachers said she had a rare touch, the kind that made pieces feel alive. She practiced every day, sometimes forgetting to eat or sleep, just because she loved it that much. Her mother worked extra hours to pay for her lessons, always telling her to dream big, but dreams can change quickly when life hits hard. Lena's family went through a difficult period that forced her to stop everything. She had to step away from the competitions, the lessons, the late-night practices. At first, she thought it would be temporary, but temporary turned into permanent. The piano in their house got sold to cover bills. The music books went into boxes. The trophies were stored in an old cupboard nobody opened anymore, and just like that, the girl who once lived for music became someone who avoided it entirely. Hearing piano pieces in public places made her heart ache, so she learned to tune them out. She took jobs to support her family and pushed all her dreams aside without telling anyone how much it hurt. Now, sitting in front of the grand piano, she realized she had spent years pretending it didn't matter. But deep down, it always did. She exhaled slowly. The crowd's voices sounded far away, but she knew they were still watching. The billionaire raised an eyebrow, clearly growing impatient. A few people shifted in their chairs, waiting for something to happen. Lena gently pressed another key. This time the note was a little louder, a little clearer. She let her fingers hover above the keys again, feeling the old familiarity return. It was like touching a piece of her past, she thought. She had lost forever. Two guests near the front leaned toward each other. Does she actually know what she's doing? I don't know. But she looks different now. Lena didn't hear them, but something inside her was changing. She wasn't thinking about the crowd anymore. She wasn't thinking about the billionaire or her job or the embarrassment she feared. She was thinking about the piano, the one thing that had always made sense to her. Her fingers warmed slowly, and she touched the keys again, this time playing a simple, slow line. It wasn't a full melody, just a gentle pattern she used to practice as a child. But the sound floated through the hall in a way that made people pause. The billionaire uncrossed his arms slightly, tilting his head. His smirk softened. Lena took another deep breath. For the first time since she walked into the event hall that evening, she felt a strange calm spreading through her chest. Not confidence, just calm, like she had stepped into a space where nothing else mattered. She looked down at the keys, seeing them not as a challenge but as old friends. She had finally found again. her mind drifted briefly to everything she had been through. The long nights she spent worrying about bills. The mornings she woke up tired but forced herself to work. The dreams she quietly packed away because there was no room for them. No one in the room knew her story. To them, she was a waitress with a tray and a uniform. But the piano knew. It remembered her even after all these years, her fingers pressed down again, forming another delicate sequence. It wasn't a performance yet, but it was enough to make the room soften. Conversations died down one by one. People turned their chairs. Even the servers paused for a moment, surprised to hear something so gentle coming from someone they worked beside every day. The billionaire leaned closer. He wasn't laughing anymore. Lena's heart beat a little faster, but not from fear. It was something else, something like hope. She could feel the music rising inside her, waiting to be released. But she still hesitated. The memories were strong, almost overwhelming, and she wasn't sure she could handle opening that door completely. Finally, she lifted her hands off the keys and placed them gently on her lap. She sat still for a moment, gathering herself. She didn't want to play just random sounds. If she was going to play, it had to mean something. It had to come from the same place where her love for music still lived, hidden but alive. She closed her eyes again, letting the memories settle. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands and placed them back on the piano in a position she hadn't used in years, the starting point of one of the first serious pieces she had learned as a teenager. Her posture straightened without her even noticing. Her breathing steadied. Something about the way she sat there made the room fall even quieter. A young guest near the stage whispered, "She looks like she's about to play for real." Lena didn't hear him. She didn't need to. Her mind had finally quieted. The noise in her heart had softened. The heaviness in her chest had turned into something lighter. She let her fingers settle on the keys, feeling the smooth surface, remembering every curve, every weight, every sensation she thought she had forgotten. Then she inhaled again. One slow breath that seemed to hold years of emotion. Behind her, the crowd waited. The billionaire watched closely. The hall was no longer mocking her, just watching. Curious, unsure. And right there, in that silence, Lena prepared to play the first real note of a performance she hadn't expected. A performance that would soon change the entire room. Lena's fingers hovered above the keys as a deep silence filled the hall. It wasn't the silence of boredom anymore. It was the kind that happens right before something important. People shifted slightly, leaning in without realizing it. The billionaire lowered his arms, his face losing that mocking expression he carried a few minutes earlier. Even the servers stopped walking for a moment. Lena didn't notice any of them. She was completely inside her own world, a place she had avoided for so long that stepping back into it felt almost unreal. The moment her fingers pressed the first gentle chord, something inside her clicked like a locked door. She thought she'd never open again, finally giving way. The sound that filled the hall was soft at first, almost like a whisper. But it was a whisper filled with emotion, warm, fragile, honest. The piano responded to her touch like it remembered her. Every key felt familiar, like old memories returning slowly, gently reminding her who she once was. The crowd didn't move. Nobody expected that first note to sound so clean, so steady, so full of depth. A few people who were raising their glasses paused halfway. Someone near the back stopped mid-sentence. A woman in the front row lowered her phone, surprised. Lena didn't look up. She wasn't playing for them. She wasn't even playing for the billionaire who had mocked her. She was playing for herself, for the part of her heart she had ignored for too long. Her fingers moved again, forming the beginning of a melody she had learned when she was barely a teenager. She didn't play it exactly like she used to. Back then, it was technical, focused on hitting every note correctly. But now, it felt different. Years of life, struggle, and quiet pain changed the way her hands touched the keys. The music sounded older, deeper, like it carried weight and truth. The soft melody floated across the room, wrapping around the guests like a warm breeze. It wasn't flashy or loud. It was simple, emotional, and honest. Each note seemed to speak to something in the hearts of the listeners. The billionaire blinked slowly, not expecting this at all. He had been ready to laugh, ready to make another joke, ready to dismiss her after a few clumsy notes. But now he found himself leaning forward, listening more carefully. As Lena continued playing, the room transformed. The lights still glowed softly, but everything else faded. The clinking of glasses stopped. The whispers ended. People who were standing sat down quietly, as if afraid to miss even a second of the moment. Her melody grew a little stronger. It wasn't loud, just fuller. It felt like she was telling a story through the keys, one of loss, one of memories, one of dreams that had been pushed aside, but never completely forgotten. The piece she chose wasn't something anyone recognized. It wasn't from a famous composer. It wasn't something people heard at concerts or movies. It was something she had played alone in her old room during late evenings, practicing it over and over, pouring her heart into it without anyone listening. Now, for the first time, it had an audience. A man near the back whispered to someone beside him, "I didn't expect that." "She's actually good." His friend shook his head slowly. "Good? She's better than the musicians they usually hire." But Lena didn't hear them. The more she played, the more she felt herself sinking into the music. Her fingers moved faster now, not rushed but confident. The melody began to lift, rising gently like it was gaining wings. She could feel the emotion building inside her, years of holding things in, years of hiding her passion, and years of avoiding what she loved most. As she moved into the middle part of the piece, something inside her shifted again. The melody deepened, growing more emotional. Her hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with feeling. Every note carried a part of her story, a part she had never spoken out loud. She didn't have to. The piano spoke for her. A woman sitting near the stage felt tears welling in her eyes. She wiped them gently, not even sure why she was getting emotional. She didn't know Lena. She didn't know anything about her past. But the music reached her anyway, touching something gentle inside her heart. Another guest placed their hand on their chest without realizing it. Breathing slowly as the melody washed over the room, the billionaire's smile had completely faded. He wasn't mocking anymore. He wasn't amused. He wasn't even proud of himself. He just looked stunned, quiet, thoughtful, almost embarrassed. He had turned a hard-working girl into a joke. And now she was making the entire room feel something he couldn't buy with all his money. The melody softened again, flowing like water, each note perfectly balanced with the next. Lena's fingers moved smoothly, almost effortlessly. It was as if her hands remembered everything her heart had forgotten. Her breathing steadied. Her mind cleared. She wasn't thinking about mistakes or judgment. She wasn't thinking about the past or the crowd. She was simply playing something she hadn't allowed herself to do for so long. People in the hall watched with wide eyes. Some leaned forward, their elbows on the table. Others held still, afraid to move because they didn't want to break the moment. A soft gasp escaped someone's lips when Lena reached a part of the melody that rose just slightly higher than before, carrying an ache that felt almost too real. The kind that made people think of moments they had lost or memories they had tried to forget. Her hands moved delicately, then firmly, then delicately again. She controlled the piano with such gentle strength that the sound felt almost human. It was warm, emotional, alive. For the first time in years, Lena felt like herself again. The girl who once loved music wasn't gone. She had just been sleeping inside her, waiting for a moment like this. A moment she never expected to happen in front of a billionaire and his wealthy guests. Her shoulders relaxed as the melody transitioned into its final movement. The notes grew fuller, richer, almost like her heart was speaking out loud. She didn't rush. She let the music breathe, letting every note linger for a moment before moving on. The hall was completely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the billionaire didn't dare interrupt. Lena closed her eyes briefly as she played the last emotional climb of the piece. It rose slowly, beautifully, and then came down again, soft, gentle, like a quiet sigh after a long, difficult day. Her fingers moved across the final set of notes, each one softer than the previous. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Then she played the last note. It echoed through the hall and faded slowly into silence. But the silence didn't break. No one clapped. No one spoke. No one even moved. The entire room remained frozen, eyes wide, jaws slightly open, breath caught in their throats. The billionaire stared at Lena like he had just witnessed something he couldn't explain. His face was no longer proud or superior. It was humbled, almost guilty. Lena kept her hands on the keys for a moment, letting the silence settle. She didn't look up. She didn't smile. She didn't expect applause. She just stayed there, breathing softly, her heart full and strangely peaceful. She had come here as a simple waitress, pushed on stage as a joke, but now she had changed the entire room. People slowly began to blink, realizing they had been holding their breath. One guest touched the corner of their eye, surprised to find it wet. Another looked down at the table, unsure how to express what they felt. Lena finally lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. Her shoulders lowered with a soft sigh, not of exhaustion, but of release. She felt lighter than she had in years. The hall remained completely still. No one knew what to say. They had expected a joke. Instead, they had witnessed a moment they would never forget. For a long moment, the room stayed frozen. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of emotion, full of surprise, full of the kind of realization people don't get often. Lena sat quietly at the piano, her hands relaxed now, resting gently on her lap. She didn't look around. She wasn't sure what she expected the crowd to do, but she definitely didn't expect the absolute stillness that filled the hall. Finally, someone near the back exhaled softly, then another. A woman wiped her eyes, as if embarrassed to be seen crying. A man shook his head slowly, like he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed, but still, no one clapped yet. They were too caught up in the moment to break it. Lena looked down at the keys and took a slow breath. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the heaviness she carried. She didn't feel the pressure to hide her past or run from her memories. She felt calm, like she had finally allowed herself to breathe after holding everything inside for so long. Then the billionaire stepped forward. His expression had completely changed. Gone was the smug grin, the playful mockery, the confidence that came from thinking he knew everything about everyone. His face looked softer now, as if the performance had shaken something inside him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He closed it again and tried a second time. Finally, in a voice quieter than anyone had ever heard from him, he said, "That was unbelievable." His voice broke the silence gently, and the room slowly came back to life. People blinked, breathed, wiped their faces. Then, almost like a wave starting at one corner of the hall, applause began to grow. It wasn't rushed or loud at first. It was soft and respectful, building slowly, spreading through the entire crowd. Within a few seconds, the applause turned into a standing ovation. People rose from their chairs one by one, first a few in the front, then a whole row near the center, then everyone in the hall. Hands clapped, some people cheered, some whistled in appreciation, and others kept their hands over their hearts as they clapped softly. Lena looked up finally, startled by the sound. She had never seen anything like it. Her performances from the past had been in small halls or community gatherings, but nothing like this, nothing where hundreds of people stood up to applaud her. For a moment, she wasn't even sure it was real. Her eyes softened, and she pressed her lips together to keep them from trembling. She didn't want to cry in front of them, not after everything. But the sight was overwhelming, so many people standing because of her music, the very thing she thought she had lost. The billionaire walked closer, slower than usual, as if unsure how to approach her. He didn't make a joke. He didn't force a smile. Instead, he lowered his head slightly in a respectful nod. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, but the microphone picked up his voice enough for the crowd to hear. "I misjudged you. I shouldn't have pressured you like that." A few guests murmured in agreement. Others just watched, curious to see what Lena would say. She didn't speak right away. She simply nodded softly, as if to say she accepted the apology, even if she didn't completely know how to respond. She wasn't the type to embarrass someone or make a scene. She wasn't interested in making the billionaire feel smaller. She just wanted peace, Seeing her calm response, the billionaire took a slow breath. "You have a rare gift," he said. "One that deserves recognition." Lena looked down again, unsure how to handle such praise. Compliments weren't easy for her. She had spent so long ignoring her talent that being praised for it felt like wearing shoes she had outgrown but suddenly fit again. Before she could say anything, one of the event organizers hurried toward the stage, excitement all over his face. Do you perform professionally?" he asked breathlessly. "Are you available for bookings?" "You're extraordinary." Lena blinked in surprise. "No, I don't perform anymore. I used to play when I was younger, but life changed." The organizer looked confused. "Changed? But you played beautifully. You could perform anywhere, concerts, events, even competitions?" The billionaire cut in, looking around at the guests. "She could play here anytime," he said. "In fact," he turned back to Lena, "I'd like to hire you to perform at my events in the future. For real, no jokes, no pressure. Just respect." The guests nodded in agreement, impressed by her talent. Lena felt her heart race at the offer. It was a generous opportunity, one she never imagined would come her way again. But she hesitated inside. She had responsibilities, a job she needed, a family to support. Saying yes wasn't simple. "I don't know," she said softly. "I need to think about it." The billionaire smiled, not a forced one this time, but a genuine, gentle one. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Then he paused and added, "But whatever you decide, you should know. You have something very special." The applause slowly faded as people returned to their seats, but the atmosphere remained warm. Guests approached her one by one, offering compliments, shaking her hand, thanking her for the performance. One elderly man told her, "Your music reminded me of something I lost years ago." "Thank you for that." A woman said, "It felt like your music was speaking directly to my heart." Another guest said, "I don't usually get emotional, but wow, that was unforgettable." Lena listened quietly, grateful yet overwhelmed. She had never been the type to crave attention. She didn't play for praise. But hearing how her music touched others filled her with a soft warmth she couldn't describe. As the crowd slowly returned to their conversations and the servers resumed their work, Lena stepped off the stage. Her hands still tingled from the performance. She felt lighter, almost like she was floating. The billionaire approached her privately after a few minutes. He wasn't acting powerful or intimidating anymore. He looked almost humble. "I'm truly sorry for the way I treated you earlier," he said. "It wasn't right. I was wrong." Lena gave a small smile. "It's okay. I'm glad you liked the music." He nodded, then hesitated. "Liked it?" "It was one of the most emotional performances I've ever seen." His voice softened. "I hope you realize how talented you are." She looked down, suddenly shy. "Thank you." As she returned to her role, carrying trays and clearing tables, guests continued smiling at her with a warmth she hadn't felt before. She wasn't invisible tonight. She wasn't just a server anymore. She was someone who had touched their hearts, even if only for a few minutes. But the most important change wasn't in the crowd, it was inside her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about music without pain. Her old dreams felt close again, no longer buried under fear and responsibility. She didn't know what would happen next, but the door she had closed long ago was open again. When the event ended and the guests left, the hall became quiet. Lena stood near the piano for a moment, alone now. The lights were dimmer, the air calmer. She ran her fingers softly over the keys, smiling at the instrument that had brought her back to life. She didn't know if she would return to music professionally. She didn't know if she could balance her responsibilities and her dreams. She didn't know what the next step would look like, but she knew something important. She wasn't afraid anymore. She knew her passion wasn't gone. It had been waiting for the right moment, and tonight, it finally returned. When she walked out of the hall, the night air felt cooler, fresher. She breathed it in deeply, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Tomorrow she would go back to work, but tomorrow would feel different. The music inside her wasn't silent anymore. It was alive, warm, and ready for whatever future waited for her. And somewhere inside her heart, She whispered a quiet promise to herself. She wouldn't let her gift disappear again.